This week marks the 25th anniversary since the collapse of the Soviet Union and formal end of the Cold War. The Cold War was a globally unique point in history in which the whole world was locked and maneuvered between two sides for nearly 50 years. Before the ink was even dry on the various peace treaties at the end of the Second World War, the Soviet Union and United States began power grabs to shore up their own positions and against each other, starting in Europe. The Soviets consolidated control over the so-called Eastern Bloc states, while the United States and Western European nations began pushing back on Soviet influence, eventually organizing into the anti-Soviet military alliance of NATO. Historians quibble over when the Cold War actually began, though Winston Churchill noted an Iron Curtain was falling in 1946. What was truly unique about the Cold War period was that the Soviet Union and the United States were at war, but never directly fought against each other. Instead, the war played out militarily through proxy wars, but also through ideological wars, championing a directly contrary worldview. The Soviet Union was based on communism and socialism that, theoretically, meant equality for all its people, no matter class, ethnicity, region, religion, or race. The Soviet system was under control of the Communist Party, which directly oversaw the Union's political systems, economies, industries, press, and social societies. This ideology was polar opposite from the United States, who promoted self-determination, democracy, free elections, and capitalism. The Soviets saw the U.S. as an imperialistic superpower, attempting to become a global hegemon, while the U.S. saw the Soviet Union as a godless oppressor of freedom and hope. Each saw the other and their worldview as evil or wrong, though they both had similar strategies of expanding global influence. Though the Cold War stretched for more than 5 decades through dozens of proxy conflicts and under multiple threats of nuclear war, the Soviet Union was always too large and unwieldy an entity to survive. Whether the lands are the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, or the Russian Federation, Moscow still faces the same geographic constraints and vulnerabilities. With no real economy outside of energy and grain, a highly diverse population, open borders where a string of competitors and enemies sit, each entity behaves at its strongest and weakest very similarly to its predecessor. So the Cold War was never whether the West could collapse the Soviet Union, but a ticking time clock of when the Soviet Union would collapse under its own weight. And though the country is technically a democracy with a heavily state-influenced market economy, 25 years later, Russia is reverting back to a more authoritarian system that seeks to influence its neighbors and push back Western influence, similar to the strategies and vulnerabilities of the Soviet Union and Russian Empire. And the world is looking increasingly uncertain that the United States can once again keep Moscow contained.